higher taxes, more government, more intervention, people moving, people unhappy, those are all results, not causes. This is a quote from John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. I'm reading this book now. I'm still in the first third of the book, so there's no formal review yet, but I still want to, this is one of those pivotal books. Maybe the book of the century for the United States, the same way Moby Dick is the book of the 19th century. I think Grapes of Wrath is probably the book of the 20th century, describing the desire of people to own, love, work, belong, and move. And the Western migration in this particular book started with the Dust Bowl problem in Oklahoma, and then, of course, became a much bigger deal over the decades afterwards in other literature pieces. The Road by Kuriak and many other symbols of going west as a sign of desperation and hope at the same time. I think this is the way I see this book. But I want to talk about two things today. One is just discuss this idea that Steinbeck alludes to in the book, which is that, let's say, higher taxes are a result, they're not a cause. And what is the result? I think this is a problem we're having right now on the macro side. And then if I can, maybe just indulge a little bit also in my own desire to move on. I think I was thinking about this recently, and I just want to express my feelings and my thoughts about my own life and the need to move on sometimes, even though maybe things are okay. We're fortunately not in a situation like the family in this book where they actually don't have a choice. We might have a choice, or maybe we don't, actually. That's part of the discussion. This is Not In Wrong podcast. It's April 8th, 2022. This is Krim Telko. Since the last update, we're down about 5%. For the year, we are now down 10.5%. The market is down 5.6%. We're underperforming by 4.9%. Unfortunately, we had a correction driven by Tesla, which is our largest position. Not necessarily a bad thing. I think this is macro-driven. Higher rates have driven that situation. So we have a massive increase in the 10-year yield, and that's one of the things we were wrong on. A few weeks ago, we said that we don't think the 10-year can go way above 2%. Now it is 2.7%. This is massive. Honestly, I think that we're looking straight face frontal into a recession here, because I don't think the U.S. economy can stomach high rates like that. The reason the rates are high is because the Fed is determined to put on the brakes. We have inflation, and we've said in several episodes before that we think that even with higher rates, of course, we believe that the fundamentals of Tesla have never been better than today. The stock is driven by macro forces. Higher rates mean higher discount rates for risky stocks. Tesla's a risky stock. This is the main reason. The same applies to our biotech stocks. Now let's talk about Grapes of Wrath and the actual statement here. So again, this is not a formal review, maybe just for new listeners. We do talk about books. We review books that we read for two reasons. One is because we want to keep a record, but also because the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And reading books is not just a pastime, it is part of the business of running a hedge fund. We're in the knowledge business. We have an obligation to ourselves to keep our minds flexible. Literature is conditioning of the mind. So those are all things that I would say are they've been discussed on this podcast several times. But I think the key is that by thinking through issues, by being inspired by stories, we evolve our mind, and evolving our mind is incredibly important in order to be able to deploy capital to profitable endeavors. We are employees of companies such as Tesla. They employ our capital. But in order to be eligible to be an employee, we have to have the ability to deploy a large sum of capital into a situation like Tesla. And for that, we need to form our mind. And forming our mind is part of again, it's part of the business of running a hedge fund. It's part of any knowledge business. It's part of any creative endeavor, and we are certainly at the forefront of creating creative endeavors. That's why it's also so lucrative. If you can create anywhere in the world as a human in this context of the economy, be it art, be it hedge fund, be it music, be it anything like that, you will be rewarded. People do reward that very well. Our economies reward creativity very well. It's incredibly difficult because there is no clear path towards a creative result of something. And this is actually the bridge I want to use. So what Steinbeck is saying in his book is, there's a line where he talks about higher taxes, the nervousness of the Western states, the nervousness of Arizona and California in particular, the nervousness within the context of people moving west. Change is coming. We're in the 1930s, the Depression. Roosevelt is raising taxes, the New Deal, the beginnings of today's social welfare in the US are being laid down in those years. And there's nervousness. People are concerned. And Steinbeck says all those things are results, they're not causes. This is something we often forget, that we think, oh, higher taxes are the cause for a bad economy. Well, they can exacerbate. We at Orange Capital Partners certainly believe that taxes are, to some extent, certainly good, but in most cases, particularly in today's case, given the high debt that we have and the high taxation of things that shouldn't be taxed and so on and so forth, that is a bad thing. But they're all results, they're not causes. That's what Steinbeck says. What he means with that is the cause is much deeper. He says the cause is the basic human desire to work and to create. And because economic forces are forcing people out of, in this case particularly, the families moving west because they can't till their land in Oklahoma anymore, because tractors are taking over, technology is taking over, machines are taking over. Human muscle is being replaced by technology. And this is happening all the time. This is happening today. Elon Musk yesterday opened the Gigafactory in Texas, and he spoke about the humanoid robot. What does that mean? He's going to replace humans with robots. Now, there's a good side and a bad side. The good side is that you replace mundane work with robots. The bad side is you take away this basic human desire to create, to actually work and create. Now, let's distinguish work and creation. Today, work, of course, is actually not as, let's say, well desired like it was in the 1930s. In other words, human labor, actual labor, is definitely on the decline, and that's because we have a lot of technology, but also we have immigration and things like that. So Americans are not particularly keen on human labor, but what they're very keen on is on creation. Creation being expression of your own creative thoughts, expression of your creativity, expression, also having agency. Those are the kinds of things I think are deep human desires, and everybody wants that. People want to have agency. In other words, if you're 22 years old, you're just out of college, you want a job that has meaning. It's just another word for having agency. And the economic forces are such that there's more and more demand for agency. But there's also a dislocation. A lot of people believe they deserve agency and they don't have the skills. We say they don't have the skills. What's really going on very often is there's a mismatch between the education level or the skill level of people and the requirements of the economy. To use an analogy, let's say you train a sport, let's say soccer. You train, you're very good at, let's say you're a goalkeeper at soccer, and you have the skills. Now in the game of soccer, the definition of what the goalie is supposed to do, the requirements don't change that much. Sometimes they change, but not that much. So a goalkeeper can actually train and become good at this, and then either succeed or not succeed. But there is a certain path towards, this is what I need to do to succeed. The economy is not like that. Let's say we train our kids to read and write and do math and all those kinds of things, which are useful, but they might not be the right skills for the requirements of the future of the economy. So because the economy is changing, and we often don't know what the requirements are. And often people who are employed in educational institutions are not maybe the best people suited to actually predict what's going to happen in the future. Maybe venture capitalists should design our curriculums in schools and not bureaucrats. Why? Because then the skill set would match maybe better what the future is, because venture capitalists have a better insight into the future. So this is just an idea, of course. I think the fundamental problem that Steinbeck is pointing out with his quote that higher taxes are, or Lenin, there's another quote that says Lenin, Jefferson, and Stalin, no, Stalin didn't exist back then, Lenin, Marx, and Jefferson, he says, are results, not causes. And the cause, again, is the deep desire for humans to work and create. That's fundamentally what he's saying. And it comes from a mismatch between what people know and what people are supposed to do to succeed in the game of economics. Now, to caveat that, let's put the situation now. We're in the 1930s in the United States of America. Free markets, capitalism, democracy, freedom, all these things are in place. So we're not in a communist system. We're not in a centrally planned system. And what Steinbeck is saying is central planning is a result, not a cause, because people are scared, because people are not good at adapting to the fast-changing economy. They'd rather have central planning. This is a valid point. There's another quote where it says the ownership of things takes the we out of people and instills the I in them. What he's trying to say is that ownership makes you egotistic. Ownership makes you driven by what you need and not what is good for the common good. Now, hardcore Austrian School of Economics type people like us, I went to Chicago, so maybe I'm not Austrian School of Economics, but I'm very close to it. They would say that my own self-interest is the best way for me to serve the community. Because in a free economy, in a free market, I can actually perform my skill set in such a way that I can be the best addition to the economy because I'll be remunerated by the price that the economy is ready to pay for me. Other people might say, no, you are a hedge fund manager, you deploy capital, you get paid. You get paid a lot more than, let's say, somebody else who's doing a lot more important work, like a nurse. This is an internal political fight. The reason the nurse is not making as much money as a hedge fund manager is because nursing is easier than running a hedge fund successfully. It is easier. Nursing is easier. It might be harder, a lot more hours, maybe it requires a lot more attention, but it is easier because it's more predictable. Hedge funds are not predictable. And I think this leads me to the point, and this is a little digression now that I have, which the whole concept of probability and uncertainty. The problem in life in general, overall, in the economy, in any life, is always the following. Anything which is predictable can be predicted. And things that are not predictable cannot be predicted. That's it. So this is almost like a derivative of the laws of physics, or the Deutschian statement that anything which is allowed under the laws of physics will happen. Well, anything which is predictable will be predicted. We will have the technology, maybe not today, but anything which is predictable will be predicted. However, what's not predictable, well, it can't be predicted. So now the question is, of course, which jobs are predictable and which aren't. And those that aren't, they tend to pay a lot more. In other words, wealth is created a lot faster in situations that are not predictable. Now that is, of course, it doesn't mean that unpredictable things are necessarily good. That's not what it means. Because you can do unpredictable things that are not good and not get paid. But if you, let's say, if you start a rock band in your teenage years, that's a highly unpredictable career path, but it can be incredibly lucrative. If you run a hedge fund, highly unpredictable career path can be very lucrative. Nursing, much more predictable. Law, much more predictable. Doctors, much more predictable. If you want to be an athlete, if you want to be a professional athlete, it's relatively unpredictable. It's much better predictable than being an artist, but it's still, the chances to succeed, it is just not very predictable. You can get injured, you can be in the wrong team at the wrong time. There's a lot of vectors that have to come into place for you to succeed. So what Steinbeck is saying is, these are now my words, that the unpredictability of the economy in a free market, the fast pace of change and the needs that change with that, and therefore also the dislocation of people, are the cause for what results, which is higher taxes and more government. So what Steinbeck here is predicting is the self-destruction of our society on the free markets. Now, again, one caveat is we might get the same result on under central planning. So this is not about central planning versus free markets. Let's just say that free markets, organic growth of the economy, Darwinian selection, or that, let's say that is the natural cause of things. Even under those causes, there is a derivative of Steinbeck's cause, which is that unless we figure out how to match the skill set to the needs in a dynamic way so we can actually adapt and therefore not have too many dislocations, unless we have that, we will have a destruction of our society. In other words, we will have more government, more central intervention, which by definition will be destructive, because central intervention always makes makes more errors and is slower in correcting those errors than if we just let it go. We want to throw in Popper here too. Popper would say, well, look, there's no other way. We have to correct errors. So if the people in Oklahoma till the land and the tractors come along, well, that's an error. They have to be corrected. They have to re-educate themselves. So yes, that's true, but it just doesn't work like it. It's very difficult to re-educate yourself when you're 55 years old and you've been farming your land for 30 years. It's difficult. It's doable, but difficult. What happens is you get dislocated, then you move to California, you basically do very low-level jobs, then you unionize, then you start voting for demagogues on the left, and they start taxing people, and then we get people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, which are, and certainly have good intentions, but in a sort of broader context, definitely are destructive, not just for the creation and wealth creation, but also for the people that are trying to protect, because wealth creation is still the best way also for the lower income people to succeed. So to summarize, this episode is sort of a first discussion of the Grapes of Wrath. There will be a lot more. This is a seminal book, probably the most important book of the 20th century in the United States. Certainly a book that's very close to my heart, because I live in the West. I have been following the stream of moving west ever since I was a teenager back in Switzerland. So I have internalized that feeling of going west and finding better places. I have found better places. I've also found a lot of heavy situations, a lot of pain and difficulties. California is not just the land of milk and honey, by no means. It is a tough place. And this leads me to the second part of this episode, which is my desire to move on. Now, this, just to be clear, it's not because California is a tough place. It's just because I feel after 8 years living here, it's time for me, or for us, our family, to move on. My son's on board. My wife is not so much on board. That's part of another episode. I don't want to go into details why that might be the case. I just want to sort of express my thoughts here a little bit. The reason I think it's time for us to move is simply to shake things up. And again, this is part of the hedge fund business mantra, which is you just have to condition your mind. And when you become too complacent with yourself, with your positions, with your thinking, you have to shake up your mind. It doesn't mean you have to change. You can stick with your thoughts, you can stick with your guns, but you need to continuously condition your mind, try new things, see new tricks, talk to different people. Travel is part of that. It's a good thing. And that's what my wife said, just go travel. Why do we have to move? Just go travel. Fine, that's maybe something we could do. But I think also moving, it just puts you in a different mindset. It gives you a different perspective. I think it's certainly good for my son, who's now 14. He has his own issues with sports. He wants to try and become a professional soccer player. So there's a certain pathway for that, which is relatively difficult to obtain. Unfortunately, he's not in that pathway right now, but he's almost there. He's at the highest level possible other than the professional pathway. So he only has to make that one step, and that's part of the problem that we have, that we don't have a team here in San Francisco that can provide that. The next closest team would be in San Jose, but we don't want to limit ourselves just to one team. We want to see if he has the opportunity to join a team in the United States, anywhere actually, where he could then pursue this dream of being a professional soccer player. So there's a lot of vectors that again have to come into place. But to summarize, my thoughts about moving are simply, it's the same like reading. Like, you have to condition your mind and also change your place, change the weather you live in, change the geography, change the people. There's nothing wrong with California. I'm very happy with California, even though there's problems here with too much left-wing politics and higher taxes. It's still the most beautiful place in the world, hands down. It's not just beautiful. There's opportunity. There's intelligent people. High level education. My son has a pathway on the education side of his career to really do extremely well because he's very good in school and he's very good in sports, which is enormously important here in California. What's concerning me is the complacency, and the way you tackle complacency is by reading literature and every now and then also moving to other places to rejuvenate yourself, to find new ways of thinking, connect the brain cells in different ways, meet new people. All of these things are incredibly important and positive. Thank you.